The topic for today is native write-back for Fabric and Power BI with Translytical Task Flows. And wow, what a long title, right? We'll get around a full 360 on what does all of that mean, and what is it not, and all of that. Before we get too far into it, just very briefly about me. I'm Jon in Danish, or John. I will respond to that too. A consultant with Inspire, a Danish-based consultancy. I write on my little blog downhilldata.com, especially on write-back solutions, but really on all things Power BI in the context of Fabric. Recently, I was awarded with the Microsoft Fabric MVP title as well. So Microsoft also thinks I know a thing or two about at least some of these things. So, so hopefully you'll leave today feeling like you've learned something new as well. Just to give you guys an idea of what will happen in the next 45, 50 minutes or so. We're going to have a little bit of a slow start. What are Translytical Task Flows? What does that solution look like? Because it actually encompasses a few different components. We'll jump straight into a demo of the final solution, so to say, that we'll be building out today. And although there will be some cooking show magic, we'll walk through all the steps of arriving at a Translytical Task Flow, taking each component one at a time, also giving you guys a suggested sort of workflow for working with these. Depending on how much time we have, we might dive into a little more advanced stuff as well, but I promise you that there will be, a very detailed look at how to get started with Translytical Task Flows, including some Python code, which at least to me is a completely new world.
I know Sue will love you on with the Python, so there we go.
That's good. That's good. I'm happy to hear.
Just make sure my brain's not 100%, but yeah, it's brilliant. Looking forward to this a lot.
Yeah,
and please do throw questions in the chat, right? As Anthony mentioned, prefix with a Q, and I'll make sure to have breaks in between each of these topics for sort of questions. And also, feel free to interrupt me if there's something that's just burning, right? Feel free. Right. Let's get to it. What are Translytical Task Flows? I think this name is a little ridiculous, frankly. The name Translytical Task Flows doesn't really appear anywhere in Fabric or Power BI. Well, it does. It's one setting in the preview settings of Power BI. We'll get to that later, but nowhere else will you be able to create a Translytical Task Flow. Rather, Translytical Task Flows they are the sum of a couple of different components that when combined make up a Translytical Task Flow. So a Translytical Task Flow, if we start in the middle here, Power BI is the sort of the focal point of Translytical Task Flows. The idea is that we can allow users to execute code, execute Python functions from within Power BI. The way that works is that we will define user data functions in Fabric. That's the icon on the right-hand side. User data functions written in Python, which we will parameterize, and we will feed the user data function parameters from Power BI. We'll give it the context of user selections in slicers, pick up user selections in visuals, text inputs in text slicers, stuff like that, to parameterize our user data function and do something with that data, right? That something could be any number of things that you could dream of doing with Python. You could send data, out of Fabric or Power BI if you want. But for the write-back use case for Translytical Task Flows, you'll usually see your user data function write whatever data the user is creating or modifying back into the same data source that your Power BI report is built on. So if your Power BI report is built on a SQL DB in Fabric or a warehouse or technically even a lakehouse, we can reflect any changes made in the backend with our user data function live in our report as well. And we can get this really nice sort of live feedback loop where users will input data or update data, trigger a function, and the changes are reflected live in the report. There are a couple of, obviously nuances to this regarding storage modes and regarding what kind of inputs can you make. We'll tackle all of that as we go along today. Now, why should you care? Why should you use Translytical Task Flows? I think there are three major reasons. It's a write-back solution that's native to Power BI and Fabric. And when I say write back, I want to stress that it's not only write back. I think Sujata and Mike Carlo had a really good session at FabCon in Vienna where they also showed that you could use it to call upon a large language model. And while they were storing the results of the large language model in the SQL DB, for all intents and purposes, the user was just experiencing a chat interface live in their Power BI report with their favorite LLM. But the fact that you can build native extensions for Power BI in Fabric is awesome. It also leads to the second point here, that it just gives us a much more simple solution architecture compared to, say, using an external tool, a third-party visual. Now, Anthony was just telling us how third-party visuals in Power BI have been acting up this week, right? Sometimes you just want to avoid that. I occasionally speak on the integration between PowerApps or Power Platform in general and Fabric and Power BI as well. And while I love those integrations, I also am painfully aware that introducing the Power Platform to the mix is a whole extra platform that you need to govern and license and figure out what to do with. So the fact that we can stay within Fabric and stay within Power BI with Translytical Task Flows is amazing. And then the third highlight, I'd say, or a really big plus for Translytical is the ability to simply execute Python code. Users executing Python code in our Power BI reports is crazy. But with great power also comes great responsibility. That's also a topic we'll return to throughout this session. Without further ado, I think it's important that you get the context here. So let's just look at what a Translytical solution could look like. So let me jump over to my browser here. I have just a big, it's quite comprehensive workspace here I use for all my write back demos, and I have a Power BI report here. Note that this Power BI report is built on a SQL DB in Fabric as the underlying data source, using direct query as its storage mode. And if this plays nice, hopefully we'll see an incredibly stupid and easy to understand left side of the report, which is just units sold by product name. Yeah, I feel like the first time I need to load data from these SQL DBs, it always takes a second. So let's pray to the demo gods that this will work in just a second. Otherwise, do I have it locally? You know what? We'll start in my Power BI desktop instead, because here it's loaded. So here is my Translytical Task Flow demo. On the left-hand side, units sold by product name. On the right-hand side, I have a bunch of instructions for the users, and then I have a couple of slicers. Basically, these are all the new slicer types. It's a list slicer, it's a button slicer, and it's a text slicer. And the guideline here is trying to save to the user, select a product in the chart on the left, then which level of detail are you commenting on? That's because technically speaking, I actually have a hierarchy here of product category and product. Here I'm on the product level, so I want to make a comment here. And then I want to assign it a score. Let's say that the Turing 1000 Blue 64, I'm going to give them the score of 4, and I can add a comment here and say Devon user group rocks Devon and Cornwall. The name will get right eventually, right? And this piece of information is new data that my end user is inventing. This could have been something else. I could have been updating, creating product descriptions. I could have been inputting budgeting data if it was a financial situation. I could have been inputting any number of things. This is just a free text field, and these are slicers selecting dimensions from our report, and this is a user selection in a visual, right? And all of these 4 pieces of information, I can pass that through a user data function that is mapped to the save button. So when I click this save button, you will see that the data gets written back into the SQL DB and will appear in this table down here. And now I'm going to do this online instead, because if I do it in desktop, it will trigger a refresh afterwards, and it's going to take a bloody long time to load. So let's just select one here instead. Test comment. Touring bikes. Wow, my spelling is great. Touring bikes are selling pretty good, but
Jon, have you? Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
On the desktop one, have you got it set up that it'll automatically kick in the refresh side of things?
Yeah. So what happens is that when you configure the user data function, you will decide whether or not it needs to do a metadata refresh of the direct query connection. It's a little stupid, but when you're in the service, you don't have that kind of delay. Let's actually demo both, so you'll see what it's about. So if I click the save button here, the first time you do it, it's going to have to kick up a node backend in Fabric, so the user data function will take a few seconds to start. That's why you'll see it spinning, request submitted, and there we go. The comments there. That took 5-10 seconds, right? If I do another one, it's just this one will be much faster. Saving, submitted, done. It's there. That was like a second, right? It's live feedback. This is semantic model data. This is data from my SQL DB being queried live, and I was writing that, right? I can modify it. Okay, sure. There we go. Modify it.
What capacity are you running on this?
This is an F8, and it's not. Right. It's not even bothering it.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty cool. If I do this in Power BI Desktop, you'll notice what happens here. It's gonna spin for a while, then it's gonna do this. Yeah, it's not great. I don't know. It's just not great. And I will highly recommend for your sort of workflow when building this, and we'll get to that later, that as soon as you sort of have the Power BI report set up with the visuals and the context you want to pick up, you publish to the service and you continue from there. So this is one of the few cases in which it's okay to edit your report in the service and kind of do the testing of your user data function there. You see, this is taking forever. Yeah. So that's the gist of it. And each of the components that were necessary to build this, I'm not sure why my slicer is looking weird here. That's the beauty of the new slicers, I guess. But in essence, this is it, right? And we'll go through each of the components that were used for this demo. We'll look at what does that user data function look like. We'll look at what does the underlying SQL DB look like. We'll look at what storage items should you pick, which storage mode should you pick, because direct query isn't the only solution. It's just what I prefer, and SQL DB is likewise my preferred solution, but warehouses and lakehouses will work too. That's kind of what's in scope for today. So I want to take the chance to, after this demo here, just ask if there are any questions in the chat already. Anthony, can you help me with that?
Just one from Uvi about interested to see the CUs consumed by the TTFs.
Yeah, good question. I actually haven't done any benchmarking, but as briefly mentioned before, it's not even tickling my F8. Obviously, what I'm doing here is single record manipulation. Okay. I have a slightly more advanced demo towards the end if we have time for it. I'm a little unsure timing-wise if we'll get to that. But it's not the Translytical Task Flow that's going to kill your capacity here. I'd say, if anything, it's if you're trying in general to do stuff with your semantic model or Power BI report that's a little crazy or a little I've been surprised honestly with Fabric how much of my capacity is consumed by interactive operations in my Power BI reports, to be honest.
Yeah,
and that will consume way more than the translytical operation that you're going to do here. So I think
if anything I've found is that the SQL database, just running a SQL database, also seems to chew the CUs side of things.
And there's something about the SQL DBs are treating more kinds of operations as interactive operations too, which is a little funky. I questioned the product team at FabCon Vienna a little about this, and they were adamant that it shouldn't be more expensive just to have the SQL DB running than, say, a warehouse. The problem is lots of people are using SQL DBs for analytical workloads that are better suited for warehouses rather than transactional operations that the SQL DB is optimized for. Maybe they're right. I haven't honestly tested in detail here. But I will say, functionality-wise, and we'll get back to that, the SQL DBs do just work the best, currently at least.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let's take it step by step. Cooking show magic may occur, and when I say that, it's, I won't be creating the SQL DB from scratch. We'll have to abstract away that exercise, but let's talk about each of these components. So how do you go about enabling Translytical Task Flows? Well, now I realize I forgot to update this slide because there was a little bit of an update at FabCon, actually, I guess a few weeks ago. the first time I made this presentation, you needed no less than 7 different preview features. This list is now down to 3 or 4. In Fabric, in your Fabric admin portal, you'll need to enable SQL databases in Fabric. User data functions used to be in preview, but as of 2 weeks ago, they're actually generally available. So in Fabric, in your admin portal, you'll need to enable SQL DBs in Fabric if you want to use that. If you're using your warehouse, you can, avoid that too. In Power BI Desktop, you'll want to enable Translytical Task Flows, text slicer, list slicer, button slicer, and connect to Fabric SQL DB, again, if that's the storage artifact that we're using. Now, again, at FabCon, they were also tooting that I think the text and list slicer, or was it the list and button slicer, are actually going GA. The last time I checked, that wasn't the case, but let's see what happens if I go into options and settings here. Just wanted to show you where these settings are anyway. So you're just going to go into the settings of your Power BI report, and you're going to look for the, incredibly long list of preview features. I think it's laughable that we have 35 preview features here. It's hard to find, right? But you can see they're still here. The button slicer, the list slicer, and the text slicer. If you want to use these, and frankly, they are the ones that integrate the best with Translytical. So I'll recommend that. And also it's somewhere. Oh, maybe that's out of preview, I guess. The connect to SQL DB. No, it's here. Connect to SQL DBs in Fabric and Translytical Task Flows. You could see how hard a time I had finding these, right? This list is too long. Anyway, this right here, Translytical Task Flow, that's the only place in the entirety of Fabric and Power BI, the user interface, that you'll see the word. It's the only place.
Well, what do they call it everywhere else then?
They don't call it anything. It's like when you go into Fabric, you'll create your user data function in your SQL DB, and when you map your button action, it's gonna say it's type data function and not type Translytical Task Flow. Yeah. So it's a little weird. The only place it'll say Translytical is in the preview feature settings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. With that out of the way, we have the preview features enabled. It's time for you to pick your write back storage item. So let's take that discussion, right? You have 3 options essentially in Fabric. Full disclosure, you could write back to data sources outside of Fabric. Using an Azure SQL DB is not out of the question here. But here, let's consider the options in Fabric. SQL DB, warehouse, and lakehouses. You may know this, but the endpoint for lakehouses only allow you to write to files. The SQL Analytics endpoint is read only. And the problem with that is that if we are to pick up the data that we write to lakehouse files, we're going to have to not only write data to our files with our user data function, we also need to kick off some kind of process that puts that data into our tables and makes it available for our semantic model. So that's why I'm not so fond of lakehouses for this kind of solution, but technically speaking, you can make that work. Warehouses allow you to write directly to tables, but there are some limitations. The limitation mentioned here is not going to be there for so long. At FabCon Vienna, they promised that identity columns are coming soon, and they are honestly a godsend when it comes to building stuff like Translytical, where you maybe want auto-incrementing keys in your write-back tables, stuff like that. In general, the T-SQL limitations on warehouses are just a little bit of a pain sometimes to navigate. So SQL DBs with better T-SQL support and also being optimized for transactional single record read writes, stuff like that, is exactly what we need. Full disclosure, warehouses will work too, but they are a little less straightforward to use and perform slightly worse. And when I say slightly worse, it's almost unmeasurable. So honestly, performance-wise, warehouses are just as good. It's mostly that I'm annoyed by having to make weird workarounds for primary keys and identity columns and stuff like that, that I prefer.
But I think, Jon, it's not only just for that, though. It's just thinking about it is where essentially you're ending up with a Power BI report that you are potentially combining 2 different data storages for your report, where most of the time you're running stuff off of the lakehouse or warehouse.
That's true.
That's the intention, side of things. But you're then having to have the SQL database as well, so you can then do the TTFs.
Yeah, and I have that argument with me, so to say, when we discuss the storage mode as well, and the same argument goes for both storage mode and for artifacts here. That of course, you can have your write back destination be a single table in a SQL DB, and the rest of your semantic model, the rest of your backend could be a warehouse or lakehouse, no problem whatsoever. Or you could just stick to using your warehouse. That for many, indeed, it will be a huge boon to simplify your solution architecture and not have the SQL DB in place if you're using a warehouse for your gold layer already, for example.
Yeah.
So definitely good point. The only thing I wanted to show here was just that in here I have my SQL DB here. I've just ingested the AdventureWorks sample data. I should have found something more fun for you guys, but that's what I have here. And then I went ahead and created a comment table here to hold those comments and the scores that I'm writing back. And I just wanted to show you what that SQL statement looks like, and that I'm exactly using this identity column to create a unique ID for the comments that I'm creating, and also marking that as my primary key. So that's all that's going on here. Having a quick look at the table, you can see what it looks like. It's nothing crazy at all. All right. Now the storage mode discussion, just to sort of get that one out of the way as well. Again, 3 options: import, direct query, direct lake. Import works if your users do not need that instant feedback. If you are just, I don't know, you have a report with data that doesn't refresh very often, and you are just inputting qualitative comments, analytical thoughts into a big knowledge bank, and you're just appending thoughts as you go, writing them so that you can pick them up later. I don't know. There are probably other better use cases for that, but technically speaking, import works, and the next time the model refreshes, the data will be in your semantic model and you can consume that. All right. Direct lake works better. But for those of you who've experimented with Direct Lake, you might know that there is this reframing, metadata reframing process that needs to take place, where it's going to scan for new data in your backend when you do refreshes, visual refresh in your report. And at least for my testing, I see up to about a minute delay for data to appear after writing back. And while that's not an issue for reporting purposes, usually it's a little bit of an issue if you're doing write back where you want instant feedback. 1 minute is not instant.
But I've found that even just not even for write back, but just even with doing some testing just on and other times where you've got data coming into the thing, but there's still that delay to actually get to the report.
Yeah, it's funny. So, there's also that little sort of quirk that Direct Lake is not just Direct Lake, right? As of April or May as well, there are 2 ways of making Direct Lake. Direct Lake on the SQL endpoint. How does that even work? And Direct Lake on one lake. And Direct Lake on the SQL endpoint specifically has that issue that you're mentioning, right? Where they even had to invent a new API endpoint for you to manually refresh the SQL endpoint because it wasn't picking up data quickly enough for people's need. It was a little weird. It works better if you use the Direct Lake on one lake, and that's also the only way to build composite Direct Lake models where you, for example, combine Direct Lake with a single write-back direct query table. So definitely go for the Direct Lake on one lake if you have the option to do so.
Okay, cool.
Third option, direct query, just works out of the box. I think it has a bit of a bad rep, but again, it can be just your write-back table that's direct query. If you can accept the composite model sort of drawbacks, ask David Hanna on the call for all your troubles with composite models. He knows better than I. But I myself, at least, am not discouraged from having a direct query table every once in a while. Frankly, sometimes for write-back solutions, depending on what kind of reporting I'm doing, often it'll be quite simple reporting that takes place in write-back reports, at least in my experience. Sometimes I'll let my entire model be direct query. I think
the problem that I've run into, though, with composite models is with RLS.
Sure.
And where RLS doesn't work in a composite model, and that's where I've run into issues with that. So this works fine if you don't have RLS, but if you've got RLS in place, then that's
very true. That's very true. this was just a note for me to remember to say that it doesn't have to be your entire model that's direct query, of course. Especially if you need write back in a report with a huge data model, you might want to have the rest of your model be import still, right, or direct link. All right, the semantic model, I'm not going to create it from scratch, but I will just show you what it looks like, just so you can see it. It's nothing fancy. I didn't even organize things as nicely as I should. David is going to kill me for this. But in here is just the sales LT AdventureWorks schema, including that lonesome comment table that I had created in my SQL DB. I have also, in this semantic model, created a little bit of a parameter table here, and let me zoom in. This is way too small for you guys to see. This is just, me going into enter data and putting in a couple of combinations of scores and level of detail. And this is the table that I'm using to reference these slices in here. And I think that's just a really good point to make here, that you can, of course, invent small little extra data points in your model that will make sense for your write-back solution without those tables necessarily being present in your backend. So as as an alternative to creating this table in my SQL DB, I could just do that in Power BI if it doesn't have any sort of reuse potential. Just thought I'd throw that out there, that of course we can create slicers here based on, manually created parameter tables or field parameters or whatever we'd like, right? In the end, all the Translytical Task Flow cares about is what selections are being made in slicers and visuals. That's kind of the key here. With that, before we go into sort of the rest of the Power BI report and user data function, are there any other questions in the chat, Anthony?
No, nothing at the moment that I've noticed. Is that the only observation that Jake said is obviously one of the things to be careful of is with the warehouse and lakehouse is having to deal with all the small files that you end up with. So having to use optimize or vacuum afterwards.
For sure. That's a really good point. Yeah.
And so that I could well imagine that could become a problem if you're writing back so many different small files all the time. If you didn't
already have a good argument for implementing a scheduled optimize and or vacuum in your warehouses and lake houses, this is just another good reason.
Yeah, and I somebody the other day I was watching something with Mim. And he was saying that a lot of his stuff, he runs an optimized process every 3 hours.
Oh wow!
On his
really,
and he says he just chose that as a random figure, but he does that every 3 hours on his warehouses and lake houses. Okay.
Maybe I should take that to heart. I've definitely not been doing it more frequently than once a day. So
okay. So that's what he does. So
all right. So regarding this whole, designing your Power BI report, what are your options there? Well, there are 3 options, right? There's the list slicer, the button slicer, and the text slicer. There is more, but we'll get to that. It was just funny that everything was 3 here. The slicers for vertical lists of dimensional values, button slicers for, rows, grids, lists, columns. It's basically a little more flexible. I don't have a lot of great arguments currently for using list slicers over button slicers other than doing it because you can. Maybe somebody has a good reason for why list slicers are superior, but I actually prefer button slicers. Mm-hmm. And then the text slicers are quite important for sort of anything free text input that your users might want to make. They're kind of the jack of all trades in Translytical here. They are compensating for our lack of other input options. Let's put it that way. But we'll return to that discussion in a second. Important to mention that you can of course use existing slicers from your report. You don't have to make new slicers. So if you already had like a filter bar at the top at a panel, or as I mentioned, you want to pick up user selections in a visual, you can definitely do that. But a mix is probably what you're going to end up with, and that's totally fine. I do want to mention as well that the reason why these 3 slicer types, they work so well is because when you go in and actually set up your button, your Translytical Task Flow, so after you've built your report and built your slicers, you'll insert a button to your canvas and you'll configure its action to hit a user data function. And the way that works, we'll get to the user data function afterwards, but in the user data function, you will define the parameters that need to be mapped from Power BI. And in Power BI, you go to your button, select the user data function. Each of these parameters will appear as something that you need to map. When you click these drop-downs, the only things that will be available are things that come from these three slicer types, the list, the button, and the text slicer. So that's why I've sort of included those as like I'm not going to say it's the primary way you should work with Translytical, but it's kind of the way that the Microsoft team seem to be pushing you towards, nudging you towards. If you want to pick up data from anything that's not one of those three slicer types, you need to do it through the conditional formatting button. So I can take my category result here, and instead of pointing it to a slicer, I can pick up the value from any calculated measure that I have here. Or I can just say, okay, well, my users are going to make a product selection. I could also just go and say, well, give me the max of the product ID. Of course, if you follow best practices for model development in general, you'll likely have a measure that you could use, selected value, max, something like that, and an explicit measure. I will encourage you to do that. Just saying you could also do this. And in fact, that is what I've done for product ID here. I have actually just taken the max of the product ID. So that's how I pick up the visual selection and say I could have had multiple visuals, right? And if we modify, maybe I have time for that example, but even in a multi-select scenario, I could pick up the context of all these three products and pass all three products to my Translytical task flow at once. It would require, however, that I create a calculated measure using concatenate X and create a concatenated string of values for me to pass out in my UDF. Let's see if we have time to deep dive on that. But it is possible to do bulk, multiple record, write back, and pick up context from multiple. It could also just have been, a slicer that was not single select, but multi-select.
But then obviously with the multi-select, the comment that you do there is going to be applied to all of those records.
Sure. So that probably works better for sort of classification tasks, right? Imagine like a write-back scenario in which there's a number of orders flowing in and somebody needs to categorize those orders and manually enrich that data in your backend, right, through a Power BI report or something like that. That's where that might come in handy, where you can simply select 15 different items at once and say, oh, these all belong to segment A or category B.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. I think that's about what I want to show you in Power BI at this point. Are there any questions in the chat here?
There was one from UV on, can we capture bookmark links with the filters in place at the time of writing back and storing it in the DB?
I have no idea. I have actually yet to experiment with the interaction between Translytical and bookmarks. So far, my imagination has been limited to using bookmarks to sort of build dynamically changing input interfaces. I haven't thought about sort of picking up the bookmark context. I'm not sure it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jake says, you could capture and save filters with a measure. Yeah. But I mean, Jake, if you could find that article, that would be great. If you can try and look for that, the SQL BI article.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So
I love the way that this is working from start to finish. Side of things is picking up the certain elements that you need, the little ones, so we can sort of go step by step. Side of things. TTF 101.
That's kind of the idea, and I hope we will have time to at least briefly have a look at, for example, what that bulk record scenario looks like, because truth be told, it's really not that hard. There are other things about user data functions that are difficult. We'll get to that very soon, but actually the bulk record part is not it. That's not hard.
Okay, cool.
But just let's go to that. Let's talk about Translytical Task Flows. So Translytical Task Flows, or really the function part of Translytical Task Flows, the user data function that is sort of the engine behind. How do you go about doing that? Well, four quick steps to remember. You need to first define your function, then you need to publish it. You need to grant users permission to use your function, and then you need to map the function to a button in Power BI. And I just included a link here. I'll make sure you guys get the slides afterwards, but there are just some really, really cool examples of what you can do with user data functions that are publicly available from Sujata, one of the PMs from Microsoft on Translytical Task Flows. They're also all the demos she showed in Vienna. It's where she does all this crazy stuff with LLMs and some very interactive, very cool stuff that you should definitely check out. It's a little more complex than what I'm showing today, but definitely go have a look at that for inspiration. Regarding actually creating the UDF, however, let's go and have a look at what they could look like. So in my write-back workspace, I have a user data functions item here called Translytical Advanced. It is just, when you go to new item and search for user data function, among all items, not my favorites, now it's a favorite, you'll find it there. It's no longer preview, which is great. One less preview feature to worry about. This user data function can hold multiple functions at once. It is, in fact, a function set, a set of functions. And the way it works is that you have just one big canvas here in which you will use these define statements to define multiple different functions, which will then become visible to you over on the left-hand side. It's a little funky to get comfortable with the canvas here. You have to swap between develop and run to be able to track your runs versus make edits to your functions. You'll get the hang of it. There's a testing module as well. That's good to know. So when you've written a function, you can click this test button and you can manually input the values you were going to parameterize in your Power BI report so that you can test your function before going into Power BI. So you don't have to wait for all those refreshes and stuff like that. So just encouraging you to check those things out. But a little bit of a code review here, just to sort of give you guys a little bit of an introduction to my shitty piece of Python code here. Sorry for my language. The way they work, Translytical Task Flows or user data functions, is that you will need to import a couple of libraries of functions for you to use to write data back to your Fabric backend. All the examples from Microsoft, they are using this fabric.functions library, and then there's almost no documentation on this whatsoever. But if you want to implement logging, you'll need to import the logging library as well and figure out how to do that. There's not a lot of great documentation on that. I have a few blogs where I sort of scratch the surface, so feel free to check those out. But getting these two libraries in there is what you'll need for a start. You will also need to go into manage connections, and you'll want to create a connection to whatever backend artifact you're writing data back to. So here I've connected to my Translytical Demo DB, and I've connected to my Translytical Demo Warehouse because I have a function that does write back there. I should have granted them better aliases here, because this alias is actually what you'll refer to these connections by in your code. So right now, the only thing distinguishing my SQL DB and my warehouse connection is a 1. Not ideal, but that's how it works. So I have here the function that you saw me trigger before is this one called write an update comment to SQL DB. So first, I'm creating a new user data function connection to my backend DB. So you can see this is where that alias comes into play. Then I'm defining a new function, and as arguments, you have to pass the number of parameters that you are using for this user data function. The first parameter is required. You need to put in the connection that we just created up here. And then in my case, I'm mapping here a product ID, a comment, a level of detail, and a category result. Note, my SQL DB had 5 columns. It also had a comment ID, but that was an auto-incrementing identity column. I don't need to worry about that whatsoever. Had I been using a warehouse as my backend, I would have needed to have some logic in here that also took care of my comment ID. But with the SQL DB, I don't have to at all. So I only have 4 parameters here that I need to map. Then, this is a little bit of flavor. Python, do whatever you wish, but here I create just a data object that simply grabs all of those parameters coming in from Power BI. I'm using a couple of connections. I'm establishing a couple of objects here, a couple of connections to the backend and to this cursor element in the function library that will act as a human and sort of do the write back operation. Then because this is an upsert, I should probably call it upsert instead of write an update. I'm going to do a lookup, and this is simple SQL, right? I'm saying select star from where product ID and input level of detail hits a match, because that's my granularity for my operations here. And then I'm running that lookup query with cursor.execute, saying run lookup query and pass in product ID and level of detail as the matching parameters. Realizing just now that this is maybe a little small for you guys. Just let's zoom a little. Then I'm checking if there was a match in the lookup. If that's the case, run an update statement and execute it and close the connection and return a message to the user that the comment was updated. If there was not a match in the lookup, do an insert instead, execute, commit, close connection, and return a different success message to the user. And that's it. That's an upsert function. And I, with no prior experience with Python at all before trying Translytical, I managed to write this almost exclusively by, and I'll tell you what I did. I just went ahead and if you go into edit, there are some pretty nice samples in here. So if you go to insert sample, SQL DB, there are samples here for writing multiple rows of data into a SQL DB, or one row of data into a SQL DB, and it will give you a pretty nice guide on how to do this.
Wow, that is so cool.
That's customer service, right? So, me, no Python skills at all. I think I used our company ChatGPT once or twice to just troubleshoot a couple of stuff regarding the logging and the warehouse connection. But the SQL DB connection, I was like, damn, I didn't, I was just filling things out here and I got it running without knowing Python at all. And I had no errors. I was baffled. The warehouse thing.
That's impressive to do that.
I'll take that as a compliment, but it was actually meant as a compliment to the Microsoft team that they are trying to make it easy for you with some decent samples here. So just to wrap the sort of before going into a little more detailed, what more could you do with these UDFs? Just to sort of wrap it all up here, I did find my upsert function here. It expects 4 different parameters, and these are the exact 4 parameters which will show up if I, on a button in Power BI, navigate to a data function, a workspace, the function set in question, and pick the write and update comment to SQL DB. You'll see that it's these exact 4 parameters that I need to map here. It's very pedagogical. It's very hard to get wrong. What you can get wrong is mismatching data types. So you will need to, define here what data types are coming in for your product ID, for your strings, etc. You can either, modify your UDF, or you can use a calculated measure to change the formatting of your values. You decide for yourself how you make that puzzle work out. But just note that it will not figure that out on its own. You need to fix that.
Jon, the other thing as well is with that side of things, with the product ID where you've stated in there on the data types, does it enforce those data types?
It's gonna try to. If you pass a string to your product ID, it'll throw an error.
Okay, well, okay. Yeah, because there's a question from Aurora about how does one handle errors. Yeah. So say, for example, you have a connection error or an insert error.
Let's take that. So down here I have another example of a UDF. This one allows writing to a warehouse instead of a SQL DB. And then I went ahead and did sort of the trouble of adding some logging and error handling to this as well. Because frankly, this is one of the most important things to stress here. You get nothing for free. You need to develop everything in here. Like, sure, the flow will fail if you pass in a value with the wrong data type, but it will not tell your user that that's why it failed. You need to implement all of this logging, tracing, and informing of your users, and try, catch, accept everything, right? So what I'm doing here, I'm, just for my own logging, I'm saying, well, first try connect to the warehouse, log that, log the try, log the exception, throw a critical error. If I get an exception, use string interpolation to throw in the error message that I'm getting. So that it gets logged in the backend. Because if you don't do this, the default logging of UDFs is horrible. It will just show you a random like, yeah, your connection didn't succeed.
or some other
it will
weird
not tell you that. It
Microsoft
will just,
message, as we know they.
yeah, it will just say your UDF failed. It won't even tell you that it was the connection that was wrong. So maybe you're gonna troubleshoot the wrong step if you don't do these things. Then I have a little bit here, circumventing the lack of primary key stuff, doing a lookup max ID, increase by 1, try catch, all of that. Gonna do the same for the lookup existing records, gonna do the same for my upsert logic. Basically any kind of data validation that you'd need, you would have to yourself wrap in a try catch except logic wheel in your UDF. So that's how it's done. So good question that you had there, and
tied in very usefully, I must say, to that one.
Yeah. And I'm no expert. There's probably better ways of doing this. This was just, a Python noob's attempt. But I found that this at least helped me troubleshoot it took me a while to figure out the warehouse connection, and just to take that very briefly, the trouble with, so when you create a SQL DB connection, it's gonna tell you that, where is that? Oh yeah, right. When you do your selects and your updates, it's okay to just refer to schema and table. But for some reason, when you do it with the warehouse, you need 3-part naming convention. And there's no way it says that. The samples that you can insert doesn't say that. I don't know. It stumped me for so long until I finally got on the right track by implementing some logging and figured out that it was even just, my connection here that in the select statement that failed. So
that's
don't
really
be like
weird
me.
that they don't make that obvious, I must say. Yeah. So the warehouse, you need to
3-part naming.
Full
naming. Not sure why, but you do. Yeah.
Whereas SQL, you can get away with just the schema and the table.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little strange, but that's how it is. So now you know. A little bit of a hack for you guys if you are intending to do this with a warehouse backend. We're running awfully quickly out of time here. I just want to make sure before we jump into potentially just looking at bulk records or whatever else questions we might have, that I put up this slide here, because to me, the most direct competitor to Translytical Task Flows is write-back solutions built with PowerApps that I also do a couple of sessions on. And just to sort of highlight the pros and cons of each of these solutions, what I really like about Translytical Task Flows, this is mostly just a recap of the initial sort of fly-in of the session. I love the simple solution architecture. It's also likely cheaper because you don't have to worry about the licensing costs of PowerApps using premium connectors to write to SQL connections. The Power BI integration is a little more seamless with Translytical. I mean, I think this looks pretty nice. Sure, I spent a little bit of time formatting this to look nice, but I think it looks nice. If I had put a Power App in here, I would have had a weird black border around stuff. It would have odd resolution. It would be really hard for me to match the font size to the rest of my report. It feels native. It is native, and that's awesome. And I also love the flexibility, obviously, of Python, that theoretically, I can do anything with the outside world if if I'm allowed to by whatever tools I'm working with. Cons, well, it's not everything anymore, right? But there's a lot of stuff still in preview here. And then the biggest con really is the limitations on the input side of things. So while it is possible to pick up context from visuals, from slicers, and even also the old slicer, if you use a calculated measure, you can still use a drop down in the old slicer. What would you do if you need to input a date? Your users will be inputting those. Well, you could create a dropdown, but I'd love to see a dropdown with 365 dates.
Yeah.
You'll have to input that as free text, and then you as the developer of the Translytical Task Flow have the pain of trying to pick up the scraps, and make it, validated. What's the format here?
So you can't sort of have a date picker or a date slicer or something like that.
Well, if you look at the core visuals vision board, the Miguel Myers, like what's coming for visualizations in Power BI, there is an item that's far in the horizon called the calendar slicer, but it's it's not being shown as being actively worked on, but it's on their radar. So we're gonna have it eventually. But until then, you're stuck with free text input and dealing with the aftermath in your UDF. And that's just one example, right? The other example, so briefly discussed, I could probably make a bookmark here, have a little arrow, and have multi-page inputs. Or what if I managed to build in a little bit of sort of dynamic inputs here with my parameter table. So if I choose product category, the number of scores I can assign changes dynamically. But if you want to go really crazy and show, hide different inputs depending on choices made by the user earlier, it's not easy, right? PowerApps can do all that very easily. It's so easy to build a dynamic input flow with PowerApps. I think performance in PowerApps is a little bit better. You can definitely build worse performing PowerApps too, but especially that first write back action, like I would hate as a user having to wait 10 seconds for my first write back operation of the day to go through, right? Even if it's only the first one that's really slow, I think that's not good. PowerApps, they are very stable in that manner if you've built it well. You can also make bad PowerApps, but in general, I'd say they have slightly better.
But I suppose just the time I've spent playing around with it, it's not a lot of time. I've just found PowerApps can be a bit sort of, you got to know what you're doing, and a bit flaky sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's I don't know if it's flaky, but there are limitations of the PowerApps integration. I also put that down here. There's the whole how many rows from Power BI, from your semantic model, from your sort of filter context can PowerApps be aware of at once, and you can have errors if you're not conscious of that limitation. If you build bulk write-back solutions with PowerApps and you're trying to just insert those, it can be very bad for performance. But if I have a session I do on PowerApps for write-back that uses stored procedures in Fabric warehouses, and I tell you I can write back 50,000 records in 2 seconds if that's what I want to. It's incredibly powerful if you know what you're doing.
So but then also, too, the other thing that you could add to this list as well is that the cons of the TTFs is that you got to have Fabric. Whereas the PowerApps, you can at least use that for shared capacities.
In a Power BI. Yeah, that's true. Very true. That actually brings me sort of to the last slide here. Other limitations of Translytical Task Flows. It only works with Fabric native storage items. Well, it doesn't only work with, but the easy to create connections and aliases only work with Fabric native storage items. You can authenticate to an Azure SQL DB, but you need to handle in code all of the authentication. So I guess I should modify this slide. It's not fully true. It only really works, at least well, with the new preview slicers without going through calculated measures. If you're using PBIR and PBIP, it's not going to work at all. Translytical is simply disabled in those cases, which is a huge shame. And Translytical Task Flows do not work for embedded scenarios. So no letting externals click your button to save data in your backend. Good to know, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a few minutes for questions, and I'll happily stay another 5 too. But just wanted to throw this up here before I forget. If you thought what I presented today was remotely interesting, find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. And I have, 5, 8 different blogs in Translytical Task Flows, sort of really giving you the nitty-gritty details and code examples that I also showed you most of today. So if you don't want to watch the recording but want to read stuff, find it all on Downhill Data. There's another blog coming in a week or two about the bulk records that we didn't really have time to cover yet. But yeah, I don't know. Are there any other questions in the chat, Anthony?
Yeah, just there was a couple of other ones. There was one that Aurora raised about, can you pass the errors back to the Power BI for the user to see?
Yeah, great question. Let's have a quick look at that. So the way that works is through string interpolation again. So if you store the, if you have logging in place, you can store whatever logging error message you have, and you can return that. That's actually what I'm doing here. So I'm saying record update failed, and then I'm passing in the error message thrown by my exception here. So here I'm storing my exception in a variable, and I'm returning that as part of my, this return statement is what's going to show up in the little pop-up that the user gets as a confirmation box.
Oh, I see. So that error message will come up in the pop-up box.
Exactly.
In the Power BI,
and that was how I finally worked out why my warehouse connection was not working.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, there we go. That answers that one. And then the other one was UV asked about, can we have custom visuals like the info rivers using one of their sort of date pickers?
That's a really good question. Maybe. I mean, I don't see why not. As long as you are able to filter your semantic model by making a selection in that custom visual, and then pick up that selection through, I mean, just a simple selected value of your column dex calculated measure. That could actually maybe work. I have not tried that, but that's a really good idea. Yeah.
I mean, I would suspect that you could use, another custom visual, because I know I saw a session at SQL Bits this year where James Dales did something with icon map, and he was, that was a custom visual that he was picking up stuff, and he was using he created TTFs through that.
There you
so
go.
there obviously must be
that works.
You obviously must be able to do it.
Good call. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's all. Yeah, that's all the questions. I've posted the blog link to the blog site as well in the chat. But yeah, that's all seems to be all of them. And then Jake did put a link in for the logging, the error messages and stuff as well to an event house if you wanted to as well.
Oh, very cool. Yeah.
But I suppose if you're logging them into the SQL database, it's all there. It's all in one place. Yeah. And then they're popping up for the user to see. So it's less architecture to have to put into place.
Right. Yeah. I could see why you'd want to use the event house, but I guess it depends a little on the use case, right? If you're having more of an enterprise write-back scenario where you implement this maybe throughout multiple reports, it'd be nice to aggregate it in an event house. I could see that. Yeah. For a simple sort of common solution for an ad hoc report decentrally in your organization, maybe the SQL DB is just as good.
Well, exactly. And so, but that was brilliant. That was amazing. I must say, I'm just like, oh, now that gives me even more inspiration.
It was fascinating listening to the presentation and hearing you two discuss it with all the questioning and the back and forth. I really enjoyed that, Jon and Anthony. It was
cheers.
It was really good.
No, that was lovely, and I just love the sort of layout and the sort of just step by step through the thing. So you can, because some of these things you look at it and you think, oh, that's too complicated.
It's a little daunting. Yeah.
And then like these little things and these little tips that you've got that you said there about the little drop downs that Microsoft have got, that you've got a baseline to start with.
It's a good place to start.
That you're not having to try and write all of that complicated code.
Go find Sujata's great examples, right? And steal something from my blog too, and you're off to the races.
No, that'll be brilliant.
I think you're right. The product team have done a fabulous job in trying to make you able to use Python easily, and those it's and to see someone like you just start off and use it and have it working, it's brilliant. That was brilliant, Jon. Thank you. I loved it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to present to you guys.
No, I'm glad you accepted, I must say, so, which is good.
Yes, thank you. So what I'll do, I won't do it tonight because my brain's not working, but I'll stop recording now. Record and transcribe. Stop. Yeah. So I've stopped recording, but what I'll do is